Guten Abend. That was really nice, and not always the case. You to you. Madam Managing Director, Mr. Chairman of the Governing Board of the Swiss National Bank, distinguished guests and dear friends. Welcome again to a very special evening. On behalf of the Swiss National Bank and the Swiss Institute for International Studies, I'm very proud to greet you all here at Zurich University. This is, without question, an absolutely outstanding event. We have the great honor to receive, among us, the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. Dear Mrs. Kristalina Georgieva, thank you very much for your presence, your patience, and that you are here in our country and in Zurich. We are more than honored, ladies and gentlemen. We try it again. You see, it gets better every time. We also greet Professor Thomas Jordan, Chairman of the Governing Board of the SNB. For 12 years already, which shows, as I have said in these premises before, Swiss stability is at its very best. Welcome back, Thomas. Okay. What do we expect from today's evening? Well, it is no secret that not only the world's politics, but also its economy have seen more stable conditions. And even if it is true that modern times, ladies and gentlemen, are always changing quicker and quicker, accelerating and challenging our daily lives, it seems that the last years brought us even more dangerous and difficult constellations. The fashionable, even magic word is, of course, disruption. Referring to the field of economics and finance, how do we handle the complex architecture of interest rates? How can we stabilize and fortify the numerous centers of debt? Do we have to fear, in a nearby future, a new global recession? And if so, how can we manage to avoid the worst? These and many other questions are, of course, prominently in the focus of the IMF. It is therefore a fantastic opportunity to discuss our topics with the Managing Director. Kristalina Georgieva was born in 1953, sorry for that, won't happen again. I learned my lesson. Started her stunning career at the World Bank Group in 1993 as an environmental economist for Europe and Central Asia. She then held numerous important positions before she became, in 2010, EU Commissioner and later Vice President for Budget and Human Resources of the European Commission. In 2016, she returned to the World Bank, and 3 years later, she became Managing Director of the IMF, succeeding Christine Lagarde, who, as you might remember, has also visited Zurich as a guest of the SNB and our institute. Numerous and very important activities add to an extremely busy schedule. The more we are happy and honored that Madam Director is with us tonight for a precious hour. Thank you again, Kristalina. Thomas Jordan studied economic and business studies at the University of Bern, completing his doctorate in 1993. He wrote his postdoctoral thesis during a research period at Harvard University. In 1998, he became a lecturer 2003, honorary professor at Bern University. Thomas Jordan joined the Swiss National Bank in 1997. 2002, he became head of the research unit. 2004, he was promoted director and shortly afterwards appointed as an alternate member of the governing board by the Federal Council. And 2012, he was appointed chairman of the governing board. Thomas Jordan is member of the board of directors of the Bank for International Settlements in Basel. He's also the governor of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, for Switzerland, and holds also many other important positions. In short, a gentleman for all seasons. The format of our evening works like this. Kristalina Georgieva and Thomas Jordan will discuss the challenges and goals of the current state of the economy and, of course, of our financial systems and institutions. As I have already mentioned, the global situation is more than a challenge, reflecting big and also disturbing problems, not only for the economy, but for the societies of this globe as well. We will not solve every problem in the next hour, but awareness and a healthy commitment to engage in leadership on every level where responsibility is needed will already help a lot. After about 30 minutes, I will open the discussion on this panel. This will give you, ladies and gentlemen, of course, the opportunity to ask your questions within, of course, in a limited time frame. And always, of course, with the politeness which our two distinguished speakers can expect from such a civilized audience. So, let's start the show. Madam Director, you started your career as a public servant at the World Bank Group, as I said, in 1993, as an environmental economist. What prompted you actually to join that institution and later becoming the managing director of the IMF?
Great questions. Before I answer, I will try to get the mic to behave. Let's see. I want to thank the university for hosting us and you, Thomas, for initiating this conversation. So, I went to the World Bank by chance, and I went to the IMF by choice, mine and this of the membership. I was at MIT. Maybe I can get a handheld mic if this continues. Let's try again.
Okay.
I was at MIT as a Fulbright scholar. Somebody who knew me invited me at the World Bank to give a talk on, I remember vividly, water resource management in the former socialist bloc. A very senior person from the bank came to my talk and after that invited me to go to the bank. Two interesting observations for the young people in the audience. First, when I went to give my talk, I put my, at that time, beige jacket. It was with flowers. I walked at the bank, looked around. At that time, the bank had very few women. None of them would wear a flowery jacket. I walked out. I bought a dark blue suit, which is called Dress for Success. Second observation, right place, right time. The bank offered me a job virtually within weeks, and then I found out that it was 1992, the year of Rio, the World Bank committed to hire 100 environmental professionals. Check. It needed to work in countries that were not English-speaking or French-speaking, Central Asia, Russian speakers, check. It was incredibly poor in terms of women among their professionals and beaten up to hire more women. What I found, so that was really chance. What I found though was, I was asked to join the World Bank, and I can tell you that it was a fantastic opportunity to bring skills to the bank, but also to bring the bank to many of your constituency members. My most intense work in my first years at the bank was in Central Asia. And then later on, I did very interesting work, including being based in Moscow as country director for the Russian Federation, 2004, 2007, the years Russia was a G8 member, and very committed to reforms. Joining the IMF by choice. When Christine took the position at the European Central Bank, people talk to me about approaching it, applying for it, expressing interest, and I immediately realized that never in the history of the IMF there has been a managing director from an emerging market economy, a managing director who comes from a country that had a program with the IMF and knows the value of turning bad policies into good policies. And I thought it was high time for this to change. I'm extremely grateful the membership chose me. Little did I know that 3 months after I took the job, there would be COVID and then a war.
Yes.
It's a challenge, and I want to tell to the Swiss people here in the audience, I got a great deal of preparation right here in Switzerland. In the years I was Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid and worked with ICRC, worked with the humanitarian community. Switzerland is the center of humanitarian competence, and when COVID hit us, being a good economist, yes, helped, but understanding that when a crisis of that nature hits you, there are things you have to do very fast, and we did them.
Okay, we heard already a little bit on the IMF, and now, of course, I would be interested to hear from Thomas what your relationship with the IMF is. What does the IMF play for a role for the Swiss National Bank and for Switzerland as a whole, of course, and also what is the role of Switzerland for and within the IMF?
Well, the IMF is an extremely important organization, and we have a very close, very good relationship together. Well, Kristalina already mentioned what the IMF is doing for the stability and the prosperity of the world. We are a small open economy. We are exposed to many shocks. The better the IMF is doing its work, the more stable the situation is for us. So it's extremely important work, and we are profiting a lot. The IMF is also, I would say, an intellectual and analytical powerhouse. So they conduct every year an analysis about Switzerland's fiscal policy, monetary policy, structural policy. So we have a very close dialogue, and we can profit from this advice quite a bit. The IMF is also an institution that creates a very good structure for a discussion among the different countries. So not so long ago, the IMF developed this integrated policy framework. That was really a framework where we could look at how international imbalances, capital flows, but also policy tools like interventions should be looked at. And that was not only relevant for emerging markets, that was also relevant for small open economies, advanced economies like Switzerland. So we profited a lot from this framework of discussion that then guides a little bit the discussion between different countries. We are also contributing to the work of the IMF. We are one of the financiers. We have the quota that we are providing. We are providing also funds into these different trusts that help especially the poorest countries in the world. But also we contribute with our work at the executive board. We try to be as principle-based as possible so that we can provide or give important input to a very good discussion in the board. And I think that hopefully is helpful, Kristalina, in that discussion. But you can see it's a very important dialogue that you have, and I think we are profiting a lot from this very important institution.
It's a very close relationship for a long time established, of course. Switzerland's role is also important, as we know, and we are thankful that it is in such brilliant hands. We have to say that, of course. Now let's have a little outlook on the world. One of the tasks of the IMF, of course, is, as you mentioned it before, monitor regional and global economic trends. Last month, the IMF released its World Economic Outlook. Can you provide an overview how the IMF sees the state of the world? And everybody, of course, is now very interested about your answer. And what are the main near-term policy priorities?
We all have to recognize that we live in a more shock-prone world. What happened in 2020 with the pandemic, what happened with the war in Ukraine, is not going to end, and that would be it. We will see more of these shocks, especially because of the climate crisis. What is remarkable is that despite all these shocks, the world economy has proven to be remarkably resilient. We are not in global recession. Last year, there were fears that most of the economies would slip into recession. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
On the contrary, we are projecting 3.2% growth for this year, around the same next year. Inflation that has hit us with a very strong force is on the decline. Almost everywhere, very few exceptions. And as a result, many central banks are either already making plans for cuts, some have made cuts, Switzerland being the first among the top economies to do so. And therefore, we see the famous phrase, soft landing, we see this as the likely outcome this year. But fasten your seatbelts. We haven't quite landed yet. And I want to make 3 points for how we look into the future. The first one is that inflation is down, but it is not gone. In the United States, it has proven to be more sticky, and that means that the likelihood of the US going forcefully with rate cuts is very low. When the US keeps interest rates high, this combined with a very strong US economy makes the US very attractive for capital flows that would then not go somewhere else. 33% of the money on the move are going to the US against 18% before the pandemic. And this is the combination of strong growth and strong economy. When this is happening for other countries, that translates not only in loss of opportunity to attract capital, but also in currency depreciations. And for some of the economies affected by that, it is a real problem for policy makers. 2, growth is positive, but weak by historical standards. Because when growth is weak, we end up with stagnating standard of living, and then much less resources for anyone, including for those that are saying, let's help more the developing world, which I, by the way, subscribe to.
Right.
And why is growth so weak? Because productivity is weak. And why is productivity weak? Because we have not been able to transform technological advancements into meaningful increase of productivity. And the third reason I would not pop up champagne, despite the fact the world economy is resilient, is because we are faced with very fast-moving transformational forces. One, digital and especially artificial intelligence. It is likely to impact within the next couple of years 60% of jobs in advanced economies, 40% of jobs around the world. This is like a tsunami hitting the labor market. And we have very little time to get people ready for it, businesses ready for it. It could bring tremendous increase in productivity if we manage it well, but it can also lead to more misinformation and, of course, more inequality in our societies. And the second big transformational force is moving to the green economy. If we do not succeed in this decade to dramatically shift our growth model to low-carbon, climate-resilient growth, I very much fear that it would be more costly for all of us and less effective. So we have a lot to do as as humanity, and we have the need for more collaboration, more coming together rather than pushing each other apart. And to put it in the context of this evening, we need to channel the energy we have for good.
Absolutely, that's why we are here. So we talked about inflation, and okay, it is a fact that inflation never played the role it played in other countries, in Switzerland, to our benefit, of course. And I would like to ask Thomas Jordan, why is this the case? Of course, you were happy, but can you explain the whole system a little bit more?
Well, as you said, we had lower inflation compared to most other advanced economies. I think the big difference is that we probably realized relatively early on that it is more permanent than only transitory. That was the big discussion when we had the increase in inflation, whether everything is just transitory or whether there are also parts of it that could be more permanent. And then already in 2021, we said, well, in kind of risk management, we have to assume that more could be permanent, and we let the Swiss franc appreciate. So more or less in the magnitude of the inflation differential, so that the real interest, the real exchange rate remained more or less stable. I think that is probably the biggest difference, that we tightened in that sense through the exchange rate, our monetary policy, earlier than the other central banks of the advanced economy. So that's probably the main reason why we have a little bit lower inflation here in Switzerland. And of course, we could not protect Switzerland completely from inflation because higher oil prices, higher energy prices in general, but then we had also to move interest rates up. But I think this is the main difference, that we started a little bit early to tighten, and especially that we could let the exchange rate appreciate more or less in the magnitude of the inflation differential to the European Union or the Eurozone and to the United States.
The Swiss National Bank was also the first major central bank to lower its policy rate in March already. This year, other central banks may follow soon, we don't know, but there are certain indications. What prompted SNB to lower rates so early?
Well, Kristalina already mentioned that a little bit at the beginning. So the fight against inflation is far advanced. In Switzerland, we had really big change in our inflation forecast earlier this year. So inflation, the outlook for inflation is much better. It looks that for the next few years, inflation could be really within the range of price stability. At the same time, we had a relatively strong appreciation of the Swiss franc at the end of the year, not only in nominal terms, but at the end also in real terms. So it looked like the monetary conditions without adjusting our monetary policy could be potentially too tight. And that then triggered us to change policy already in March and lowered by 25 basis points. But there's a lot of uncertainty. We have to follow that very closely. We have this famous risk management approach where we look at different scenarios and then we try to take that decision where we can react into the future in the easiest way. So we look, if you are wrong, and on what side is it better to be wrong, and where you can react again easier than just take the opposite decision. So I think that was one of the reasons, or the key reason why we then came to the conclusion it's the right time to lower interest rates already in March.
And it seems to work.
Yeah.
We already talked about growth in the global perspective, also in national perspectives. You already mentioned what has to be done, but I think it's a very difficult task between all these factors which sometimes contradict each other. Do you have further advice or ideas what could push growth to a higher level, also by, of course, respecting the environment? And this makes the whole thing more challenging even now.
Well, we need to look at the countries that are doing really well, and why are they doing well?
Exactly.
And which are the countries that are doing better? And what we see are three things that make countries grow faster and be more productive. The first one is not at all trivial, energy security. And of course, we want renewable energy to be the one on which we rely. Why is energy security so important? Well, we saw it when Russia invaded Ukraine. It brought tremendous pain to the European nations that were more dependent on Russian oil and gas. And it became very clear that we cannot have a functioning economy without a reliable source of energy. But we also know that the new technologies, the digital technologies, they are increasing demand for energy very rapidly. And that makes competitiveness highly dependent on reliable, renewable energy.
Right.
I actually think that in comparative terms, countries that are producing reliably renewable energy are very well poised for data centers. They're very well poised to be on the front line on generative artificial intelligence. And you look at the United States, they're performing very well. They do have reliable energy, not quite yet, though, renewable as a whole. Second thing, of course, is innovation. And innovation takes us to something hugely important for growth in the future, and it is human capital. I personally believe that what would distinguish prosperous societies in the future from those that are not doing so well is how good is and how high is the quality of investing in people. And the third thing that makes countries more successful, more productive, is to have really strong and deep capital markets, so money can go where it would make the biggest economic difference.
Right.
And when you look at the depth of the capital markets, again, the United States stands up. You, by the way, are not so bad either, Switzerland, that is.
Let's try to go for a very short question-answer round. Who would like to put the first decent question? Maurice Zuffret. We have some microphones.
Ms. Georgieva, what are the most feared and the biggest geopolitical or political pressures on the IMF to behave maybe in a different way and to orient its policies alongside not only what the biggest countries in the world would like to, but also some bottom-up movements, so far as those are movements, are claiming for?
I started answering that the most dramatic thing we are experiencing are wars. Russia invading Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, very dramatic conflict. When there is a war, it is very difficult to have rational conversation about economic priorities. We at the fund, we have taken to heart the importance of keeping the membership together and retaining our role as a place for economic conversation. So policymakers, never mind where they are in terms of their geopolitical orientation, can let this outside of the room and talk about the drivers of prosperity as well as the risks for the world. And so far, we have been successful. I'll give you one example. We, after a lot of very careful consideration, we came to changing our policies to allow us to provide support to countries with extraordinary uncertainty caused by a war. And on that basis, we provided a $16 billion loan to Ukraine. When this was discussed, all countries, with the exception of the Russian Federation, understandably, all countries supported it because they realized that the Ukrainian people deserve to have a reliable, predictable source of support for their economy so they can sustain it despite the war that is still raging on their territory. And I can tell you that the outcome is remarkable. Ukraine's growth is 5.3%. Inflation, 3.2%. They collect taxes equivalent of 36% to GDP. I don't know many countries that are not in a war that have that kind of economic indicators. And they are achieving it because, to a great degree, of this anchoring role that we, the IMF, play. When the membership looks around and sees all the risks and all the troubles in the world, they are wisely coming to the conclusion that there has to be space for economic cooperation. And I can say that I personally am contributing to that spirit of we are in this together. This is the special ingredient that helps us to overcome challenges because having lived more than half of my life on the other side of the Iron Curtain in Bulgaria, I know how damaging a divided world is for people. It was called the Cold War because we didn't shoot at each other, but I can tell you that on my side of the Iron Curtain, it was really, really cold. So when I think of our role, why is economic cooperation important? Because it makes everybody better off, but also because it retains exchange of views. It retains an opportunity for the world, despite all of the differences, despite all the geopolitical tensions, to still stay together. We do face very difficult problems. We cannot resolve it in a highly fragmented world. We cannot resolve debt issues or climate issues if we don't find a way to work together. I want to finish this plea for international cooperation with one more plea, and it goes to everybody. We also have to retain optimism for the future, that if we muster the will to work together, we would see better outcomes for our children and grandchildren. And remind you, my favorite economic writing is John Maynard Keynes' essay, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, in which, among other things, he says, I have no time for pessimists. I don't have time for the reactionary pessimists who say everything is so precarious, don't make any change. Neither I have time for the revolutionary pessimists that say everything is so bad we have to destroy the world. What he wanted to see is a world of cooperation and pragmatism, focusing on solving problems one problem at a time. And I think very much we need that. I highly recommend this essay.
It's brilliant.
It was written 1930 in the midst of the Depression. And what did Keynes predict? He predicted that we will be 8 times wealthier 100 years down the road. And yes, we are. Remarkably, income per capita globally went up 8 times in 100 years. He also predicted something else. He predicted that we would turn productivity gains into leisure, and we would work only 15 hours a week. That didn't quite happen.
That's a little bit different. Of course, he was the master theorist of disruption, but he also had, at least sometimes, a very healthy optimism. And I would like to give the word also shortly to Thomas. Geopolitics and hope for the future. Now, this is your answer.
Well, just to complement Kristalina a little bit, she made a very good overview. I think we have to be optimists. On the other hand, we should not be naive, and there are certain risks. I think the war led to a situation that we have much more the risk of fragmentation of the world economy in the future. We have to fight that, but it's not easy. I think we have to be there, also realists, and see what we can do. As a small open economy, we are exposed to fragmentation. We profit from open markets that we can deal around the world. And the more fragmented the world economy becomes, the more difficult it is, especially for the smaller ones, etc. So I think it's extremely important, as Kristalina said, that we try everything in order to work together, to collaborate, and to avoid fragmentation. But on the other hand, when we see the wars and the political circumstances at the moment, there is a certain risk, and we have to do everything in order to keep it at the lowest possible level.
Whatever he needs to do. Maybe 1 or 2 short questions, and then we call it, I would say, yes, sir, with the tie, please. I check now the outfit.
I'm Harris
Appearance is no guarantee for substance.
I hope.
No disrespect.
I hope that was not a direct attack on me. But anyway.
All right. So when the IMF was created, long time ago, its main mission was to support the international monetary system. And later on, with the breakup of the fixed exchange rate regimes, it moved towards safeguarding international financial stability, right? So those have been historically, I think, the main roles that the fund has played. So my question is, looking forward for the next couple of decades, what do you think the main mission of the fund is going to be?
I am convinced that the main function of the fund is going to be to serve as the family doctor by collecting vital signs of countries and assessing whether they are problems to be attended, but then collecting this picture of, we have 190 countries, soon to be 191, aggregating this picture and then seeing which way the world is going and what does it mean for policymakers. I think and this is why it is so important that we protect the space for economic cooperation at the fund. Yes, we will continue to serve as an anchor for countries that are experiencing difficulties. I don't think this is going to disappear 10 years from now, 20 years from now. But what would be, in my view, the highest value from the fund is to hold a mirror to countries and to the world, and to help us assess where our vulnerabilities are and where the opportunities for the world are. I think the fund would play a very significant role on what I would call global threats to macroeconomic and financial stability, something that we didn't do so much in the past. You look at climate change, already the fund is systemically significant because of this holding a hand on the vital signs and climate being an important risk to macroeconomic stability, but also shift to the climate, to a green economy, an opportunity for growth. So I see the fund maturing in a way that serves this world that is more fragmented and needs a unifier so we can collectively assess the direction we are traveling and what to expect on the road. Of course, we may be in a situation in which regional organizations, we are in a situation and we will be in a situation in which regional organizations play a growing role, a bigger role. Here the European Union plays that role, ASEAN for the Asian countries, but having a global overview, being able to see the world in its entirety and where it is headed is important now, would be even more important in the future. Why? Because of the speed of change. Everything is happening much faster, and because we are in a multipolar world. And that means that unless we have a way to see the whole together, we may end up being like the 10 blind people that went to see an elephant, and they came out, they touched the elephant, came out, and everybody had a different view of what the elephant is. So we need that integrated capacity of integrating information and then drawing conclusions about trends and directions to travel more than we ever needed it before. And hopefully, I think that it would be an institution in which everybody feels you don't need to shout, we are listening to you. Actually, I took it to heart when I came to the fund, when I became the managing director. I took it to heart for all of us to give a better sense to the world community that the fund is a service to the membership organization. We work for people because policies are for people. They're not for the paper they're written on. And I can see from this evening, we still have a long way to go. But it is important that the value of the fund is protected, because if we lose this institution, just think about it, it is the only one with a global mandate to review the books of every country, the economic books, and apply judgment for that, and then integrate the picture for everybody to benefit from it.
I think that's a very good ending. Sad to say, because the situation has calmed dramatically down you know, and now we could proceed for another 2 hours, and it would be highly interesting, and then we all would join Burger King and Coca-Cola.
Next time we start 1 hour after the beginning. We sit here for 1 hour, and then we start.
Very good. And I have to say, I mean, this last statement, we really highly appreciate not only your position and your work and your standing, but your fantastic personality. And I have to say that as a Swiss, because Swiss are not famous for giving compliments, and they hide them under the carpet because they're scared of them. But anyway, I mean, this is really impressive. And also what you said, that you had to live and to suffer also under a really bad regime, gives you a much broader perspective than like Swiss people, for instance, and also younger people. And I don't go back to the topic, but sometimes I really think we are spoiled to the bones still, and we have to work very hardly to improve the life of the planet. And I think this is absolutely quintessential. So before we proceed to a famous tradition to give our guests an appropriate gift, I would shortly like to show you the next events of the SIAF. Yes, already on Wednesday, Sergio Ermotti comes here to give a talk, and a fireside talk with me that will be also highly interesting. One of the most prominent and brilliant bankers in Europe. You can believe me that I understand the topic. And then, of course, Susanne Schröder, maybe a little bit more controversial, but also highly interesting. I would say, especially also for younger people and students, come and discuss decently. We have a lot to discuss about wokeness, about fanatism, about the Enlightenment and all these topics. That could be a very, very lively, if polite discussion. Okay, that's that for the moment. We have some other events. It's not necessary to show you that. And as you might know, we are always very busy, and I have to give Sabine Sura a great compliment, give her a huge hand once, because she's the Secretary General of the SIAF. And we are already preparing our fall semester, and this will also be for your own benefit, I hope, very interesting anyway. It's a lot of work, but it's also a lot of reward. So
can I say a
yes,
word?
please, of course.
Thank you for a very memorable evening.
Well, you know, actually, the good things, the dialectics of such little noises, is also that you keep it in memory in a very lively way for the next 50 years, and that makes the topic also more fascinating. So we are now ready for the gifts. Kristalina, you said you wanted to be dressed for success, and I hope that we could manage to continue that. Can we show the picture? Yes, we have to rise to see you in this beautiful fabric frontline foulard, which is really a highly successful combination of colors, and it goes on and on. And Thomas, for instance, we know, is a brilliant water ball player.
Yes.
True?
Used to be.
Oh, come on, still.
Yeah, no.
You're young and strong. Sometimes you do it still. At least you plunge into the ocean of inflation and interest rates and whatever it is. And so we provided a special badekappe. Actually, it's for real. You can see it when you unwrap it. And it has the logo of the SIAF. And SIAF is an abbreviation, in this case, of suspense is always fun. So, again, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Give our guests, again, a huge hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thomas?
Thank you, Kristalina. Perfect. Yeah.